It started with a single glance, one that lingered too long and sent a shiver down my spine. At first, I thought I was imagining things. But as the weeks went on, it became impossible to ignore. The way she smiled at him, the subtle touches, the inside jokes shared across the office. My partner, my supposedly faithful partner, was flirting with a coworker, and I was helpless to do anything about it until I wasn't. I remember the first time I noticed it. We were at a casual dinner with some friends, and as we sat across from each other, I saw it. The way his eyes would brighten whenever she entered the room. The way he would lean in just a little too far when she spoke. It was subtle, like the faintest brush of a whisper in a crowded room, but it cut through the noise, and I couldn't ignore it. My stomach twisted into knots, my pulse quickened, and I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I was being paranoid. But I wasn't. The next week, I decided to test it. I sat back and watched, observing the interactions between the two of them more closely. It wasn't just harmless banter. It was flirtation. Playful, yet somehow serious. She would brush past him just a little too closely, laugh a little too loudly at his jokes, and the way he looked at her. It made my stomach turn. There was a palpable energy between them that I could almost taste. It didn't take long for the gut feeling to turn into something much more concrete. That evening, when we got home, I tried to confront him. I casually brought it up, playing it off like a joke. "Did you have fun with Karen today?" I asked, my voice light, testing the waters. I didn't want to come off as paranoid, but I needed to gauge his reaction. His eyes flickered, just for a split second, but I caught it. His smile faltered, then returned, too quickly. "Oh, Karen? Yeah, she's just a great coworker. You know, we've got a good rapport going." His words were smooth, too smooth. But it was the way his hands fidgeted with the napkin that told me all I needed to know. He was lying, or at least, he wasn't telling me the whole truth. "You two seem pretty close," I pressed, watching his face closely. He froze, his eyes briefly flashing with something, guilt? Defensiveness? "It's nothing," he said quickly, maybe too quickly. "You're overthinking it." But I wasn't. And deep down, I knew it. The way she'd been getting so much of his attention wasn't normal. We were partners, committed to each other, or so I thought. But this felt like something more. That night, I tossed and turned in bed, the question burning in my mind: was I overreacting, or was this a warning sign that I couldn't ignore? As much as I wanted to brush it off, the truth was clear as day. His flirting with Karen had crossed a line. I couldn't pretend anymore that everything was fine. My trust in him was slipping away, bit by bit, and I couldn't just sit back and watch as he played with fire. I had to do something. And I wasn't going to just sit there and let it all unfold. It was time to take matters into my own hands. For days, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Every time I saw him laugh a little too hard at one of Karen's jokes, every time he brushed off my concerns, I felt a tightening in my chest. I wasn't a jealous person by nature, but there was a thin line between being cautious and being naive, and I had crossed it. I had seen enough to know that things were escalating between them, and it wasn't just harmless office flirting anymore. It was serious. It was dangerous. I needed to know the full extent of what was happening, but I couldn't ask him outright again. If I did, he'd lie, or worse, he'd get defensive and twist the situation into something that made me feel crazy. I wasn't going to give him that power. But if I was going to stop whatever was brewing between them, I had to get smart. I had to take control. I spent a sleepless night thinking about it, weighing my options. I could snoop around, dig through his things, check his phone, classic moves that might give me the evidence I needed. But no. I didn't want to catch him in the act. I didn't want him to feel cornered. I wanted him to understand exactly what he was risking, and I needed to see how far he was willing to go. So, I decided to play a different game. I was going to make him aware of what he had to lose, without him even realizing I was doing it. The next morning, I began laying the groundwork for my plan. I knew that Karen was a fixture in their office lunches, and I knew that he'd been spending more time with her than he had with me lately. It wasn't just work anymore, they were connecting on a personal level. I could feel it. But I didn't want to act on pure suspicion. I needed undeniable proof that this was more than just some innocent friendship. So, I reached out to one of my old friends from work. Someone who knew the ins and outs of the office gossip. She was always in the loop, always aware of what was happening behind the scenes. I had been hesitant at first, but I realized it was the only way to get the clarity I needed without jumping to conclusions. "Hey, listen," I started when she picked up the phone, my voice steady but laced with a hint of curiosity. "I need to ask you something about the office. About Karen and, well, you know who. Have they been spending a lot of time together lately?" There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line, and then a soft laugh. "Oh, honey, you didn't hear? It's like they've become the dynamic duo. I don't think they're official or anything, but everyone in the office is talking about it. They've been having these long lunches together, and I'm telling you, the chemistry is undeniable." I felt my stomach tighten. This wasn't just about casual office interactions, it was something more. Something I couldn't ignore. "What kind of chemistry?" I pressed, trying to keep my voice neutral. Another pause, longer this time. "Look, I'm not saying anything is going on yet, but it's definitely more than what you'd call just friendly. People have been noticing. There's a lot of flirtation, a lot of secret smiles. They've been leaving the office together a lot too. And, well, no one's outright saying it, but it's clear they're close. Very close." I leaned against the counter, taking in her words. My suspicion was turning into something more real, more tangible. My mind raced as I processed the information. It was becoming clearer by the second. They were crossing a line that should never have been crossed. The worst part? I didn't think he even realized the extent of it. Or maybe he didn't care. I thanked her, hanging up the phone with a sense of grim satisfaction. Now I had the confirmation I needed. But I wasn't about to make the mistake of confronting him without a plan. I wasn't going to storm in, accusatory and blind. No, I had to show him that I wasn't someone to be taken for granted. I had to remind him of the weight of our commitment, to make him see exactly what he stood to lose. But how? How could I make him understand just how serious this situation had become? It came to me later that night, as I watched him absent-mindedly scroll through his phone on the couch. He had no idea what was coming. I decided that the next time Karen called, I would be the one to answer. And I would make sure my presence was felt, loudly. The next few days felt like an emotional roller coaster. I went through the motions of daily life, cooking dinner, running errands, chatting with friends, but my mind was always on what was happening behind the scenes. The subtle flirtations. The hidden glances. I could feel it weighing on me, that nagging anxiety that gnawed at my insides every time he pulled out his phone or answered a message. But I was determined to remain calm, to take control of this situation, to wait for the right moment to confront him without letting my emotions cloud my judgment. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about jealousy, it was about respect. It was about boundaries that had been crossed, promises that had been broken. I needed to show him that I wouldn't just sit idly by and let him destroy what we had. I was planning my next move carefully, knowing it had to be subtle yet undeniable. I didn't want to create a scene, but I wanted him to feel the shift in power. I wanted him to understand that I wasn't going to let him continue with his harmless flirtations without consequences. It happened one evening after work. He was sitting on the couch, his legs stretched out, idly scrolling through his phone while I prepared dinner. The tension between us was palpable. I could feel the distance between us growing with every text he received, every time he glanced at his phone with that guilty smile I couldn't shake from my memory. I wasn't stupid, I knew what was going on. and it was time for me to take matters into my own hands. As if on cue, his phone buzzed again, and he glanced at the screen. It was a text from Karen. I saw his fingers hesitate for a split second, and then he smiled, replying quickly. The smile he gave his phone was almost soft, affectionate. It was like a gut punch to my already frayed nerves. I moved silently across the room, pretending to be completely unaware of what was going on, even though every fiber of my being was focused on the device in his hand. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Without hesitation, I picked up my own phone and sent a quick text to my friend, the one who had spilled the details about Karen and him. I needed her help to set the stage for what I had planned. It was time to let my partner feel a fraction of the unease I had been carrying for days. Within moments, my phone buzzed. The message from my friend was short, but it was exactly what I needed. She's on her way. Don't let him off the hook this time. I took a deep breath, walking back into the living room as if nothing was out of the ordinary. I glanced at him casually, watching his fingers type away on the screen. "Who's that?" I asked, my voice light but underlined with a challenge. I wasn't going to be coy about this anymore. He needed to feel the weight of my words. He froze for a split second, his eyes flickering up to meet mine. "It's just Karen," he said, almost too quickly. "She's asking if we're free to grab lunch tomorrow. You know, to catch up." "Really?" I raised an eyebrow, walking over to the couch. "I thought we were just friends." I quoted the words he'd used so many times to dismiss my concerns. "So what's with all the catching up?" His face flushed slightly, and for a moment, I saw a flash of guilt cross his features. But it was gone as quickly as it came. He let out a nervous laugh, trying to brush it off. "It's nothing. You're overthinking it." I smiled softly, but inside, my mind was already racing. I had the perfect plan in motion, and I wasn't going to let him downplay it. I waited a beat before replying, "I'm not overthinking it, actually. I've been thinking a lot about this, about us. About what's been happening with Karen." His eyes widened slightly, and I could see the gears turning in his head. He wasn't prepared for this conversation, not this soon. But I wasn't going to let him dodge it. "Look," I continued, my voice calm but firm, "I know what's going on between you and her. I see the way you look at her, the way she looks at you. The late lunches, the inside jokes. I'm not blind. And I'm not going to just sit back and pretend it's nothing." His mouth opened as if to protest, but I held up my hand, silencing him before he could offer a weak excuse. "You're my partner, and we've made a commitment to each other. If you want to keep pretending like nothing's happening, fine. But I'm not going to stand by and let you disrespect what we have. If this is where things are headed, we need to have an honest conversation." His face flushed deeper, and I could tell he was finally starting to realize that this wasn't something I was going to let slide. His gaze darted down to his phone, and I could see him struggling internally. He wanted to deny it, to downplay it, but he knew he couldn't hide behind excuses anymore. Before he could speak, the doorbell rang. It was Karen. The woman he'd been playing this dangerous game with. I looked at him, meeting his eyes one last time. "You should answer that," I said, my voice eerily calm. "But know this, whatever happens next, it's not just between you and her anymore. I'm done being the invisible one in this relationship." He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The silence between us stretched, thick and suffocating, as he made his way to the door. I could see the discomfort in his movements. The awkwardness was palpable, and for the first time, I could feel the power shifting in my favor. When he opened the door, Karen stood there, her bright smile faltering slightly as she caught sight of me standing in the living room. She was clearly surprised to see me, but I didn't care. This was the moment I had been preparing for. It wasn't just about confronting my partner anymore, it was about making a statement. One that neither of them would ever forget. I walked toward the door, my gaze fixed on Karen. "Hey, Karen, I said smoothly, my tone dripping with the confidence I had been holding back. I think we need to talk. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw the realization flicker in them. She knew. She knew exactly what was happening. Sure. What's this about? She asked, her voice faltering. I gave her a cool smile, one that conveyed everything I needed her to understand. I think we both know what this is about. It's about boundaries, respect, and knowing when to back off. I could feel the tension crackle in the air as she took a step back, glancing at my partner, who was standing frozen in the doorway. He hadn't expected this, and now, he was witnessing the shift. The power dynamic had changed in that moment, and it wasn't in his favor anymore. Listen, I continued, taking a step forward, I don't want to fight with you. But I'm not going to pretend I don't know what's been going on. You both need to make a choice here. And if you can't respect that, then I'll make it for you. I could feel his eyes on me, but I didn't flinch. I wasn't about to let this go. Not anymore. Now, I said, turning to my partner with a hard gaze, we're going to figure this out. Together. And with that, I closed the door in Karen's face, leaving her standing there, speechless. The door clicked shut with a quiet finality, and for a moment everything seemed to freeze. The room was charged with an electricity that I hadn't felt in a long time. The tension between us was palpable, thickening the air to the point where I could almost taste it. Karen was standing outside, likely trying to process the situation, but I had no intention of giving her the space to weave her way back in. My partner, standing frozen just a few feet away, finally exhaled. His gaze was fixed on me, his lips parting as if he were trying to figure out what to say. But no words came. I didn't give him the chance to recover. The time for excuses had passed. I was done waiting. You want to explain this? I asked, my voice calm but edged with something darker. There was no warmth in my tone, just a cold, unflinching demand for the truth. The kind of truth that had been buried beneath layers of excuses, playful flirtations, and unspoken promises. He swallowed, the unease spreading across his face. It's not what you think, he said, the words slipping out too easily. I could see the guilt flickering in his eyes. He was trying to hold on to his control, but the situation was slipping away from him, and he knew it. I took a step toward him, not letting him retreat. The space between us had grown too wide, and it was time to close the gap. He needed to face the reality of what had been happening. You're right. It's not what I think, I said, my voice dripping with controlled sarcasm. It's exactly what I think. And I'm not going to stand here and let you gaslight me into believing that this is all just harmless fun. I've seen the way you've been acting with her. The late lunches. The private conversations. The little moments that you think I'm too blind to notice. I'm not stupid, and I'm not some fool to be played with. He opened his mouth again, but the words didn't come. He was stunned, no doubt trying to work out how to play his next card. He probably thought this was just another argument, another spat that would blow over with a few apologetic words. But I wasn't here for apologies. I was here to make a statement. A statement he would never forget. I didn't wait for him to respond. I wasn't interested in hearing more of his weak defenses. Instead, I stepped closer, close enough that I could almost feel the tension radiating off him. I want you to understand something, I said, locking eyes with him. What's been going on isn't just about Karen. It's about us. About what you are willing to risk for something so shallow. And I need you to realize that if this keeps going, I'm done. We're done. For the first time in what felt like weeks, I saw the faintest flicker of realization in his eyes. He wasn't prepared for this. He thought I was the one who would keep putting up with his games. He thought I'd tolerate the flirting, the inappropriate jokes, and the lingering glances. But I wasn't the same person I was before. And it was time for him to realize that. He tried to reach for me then, his hand coming up in a gesture that might have been meant to comfort me. But I pulled away, holding up a hand to stop him. I wasn't interested in his touch right now. Not when everything felt so broken. You don't get it, I said, my voice quieter now, but no less intense. You think this is just about jealousy or insecurity. But it's not. It's about trust. It's about boundaries. And you crossed mine. Now, I need you to make a choice. Because I've already made mine. He stepped back, clearly rattled by the force of my words. He was silent for a long moment, clearly working through what I had said. I could see his mind racing, likely calculating how much damage had been done in those few moments. I could almost hear the wheels turning in his head, desperately trying to come up with an explanation, an excuse, anything that could save him. But there was no way out. Not this time. I'm sorry, he finally said, his voice low, almost resigned. I didn't mean for it to get out of hand. I really didn't. I don't know how it happened. I shook my head, cutting him off before he could go any further. His words meant nothing now. His apology wasn't enough. The damage had been done. I don't want apologies, I said sharply. I want you to think about what you're willing to risk. Because I'm not going to sit here and wait for you to decide if she's worth more than I am. You made your choice when you let her get this close to you. And now you need to face the consequences of that. His eyes dropped, guilt clouding his expression. He looked like a man who had finally been caught in the act, and there was no escaping it. I could see the weight of my words sinking in, and a part of me almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But there was something else inside me, something stronger than the empathy I once felt for him. It was anger. And more than that, it was clarity. I had spent so long wondering if I was overreacting, if I was being irrational. But now, all of it was crystal clear. He had crossed a line, and I was done with pretending everything was fine. I think you should go, I said, my voice steady but resolute. I need space to think. I can't keep pretending that nothing is wrong. His mouth opened as if to protest, but then he closed it. He knew better than to argue right now. He could see it in my eyes, the decision had been made. I had drawn a line in the sand, and there was no going back. He turned slowly, heading toward the door, each step echoing in the silence that had descended upon the room. I watched him go, feeling the weight of the decision settle over me. It wasn't easy. It wasn't something I had wanted to do. But it was the only choice left. Before he reached the door, he turned back to me, his face clouded with regret. I'm sorry, he said again, his voice hoarse. I never meant to hurt you. But I didn't respond. I didn't need to. His apology was hollow, meaningless in the face of everything that had happened. The door clicked shut behind him, and I stood there for a moment, listening to the silence. It wasn't over yet. But I had made my statement. And now, it was time to move forward. The silence in the house was deafening. He was gone, and for a moment, I stood there, motionless, as if I had been suspended in time. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, but it felt like the weight of the entire world was pressing down on my chest. I hadn't expected to feel so empty. But then again, I hadn't expected it to come to this. I'd spent days, maybe even weeks, second-guessing myself. Was I being too paranoid? Was I overreacting to something that was completely innocent? Had I completely misjudged the situation? And now, with him gone, I had all the answers I needed. The calm certainty that had settled inside me was more unsettling than I had anticipated. I thought about the things I had said to him, the things I had done. In a strange way, it had all felt right. I hadn't raised my voice or thrown accusations. I hadn't resorted to dramatic outbursts or cheap tricks. I had simply stated the truth. He had crossed a line. And I wasn't going to tolerate it. But now, with the door closed behind him, I was alone in the house with nothing but my thoughts. What was I supposed to do next? I grabbed my phone off the counter, my fingers tapping at the screen with urgency. I didn't even have to think twice before scrolling to my best friend's number and sending her a quick message. He's gone. It's done. I finally said everything that needed to be said. A few moments later, her response pinged back, "I'm so proud of you. You deserve better. Don't second-guess yourself. You did the right thing." Her words, though supportive, didn't make the emptiness in my chest go away. I wasn't sure what was harder, the anger I'd felt toward him for betraying my trust or the sadness that had crept in afterward. It wasn't just the affair, or the flirtation, or the fact that he'd gone too far, it was the realization that everything we had built had crumbled over something so senseless, something that could have been avoided if he'd only been honest with me from the start. I dropped my phone back on the counter and leaned against the kitchen island, closing my eyes for a moment. I needed to process this. I needed time. But what did time really mean when the trust was already gone? How could I look at him the same way after everything? As I stood there, trying to gather my thoughts, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from my coworker, the one who had helped me confirm the office gossip about Karen and him. I hesitated for a moment, but curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the text. Just heard the office chatter. Karen's not happy, by the way. She's definitely been feeling the tension. You made an impression tonight. I couldn't help but smile, a small, bitter twist to my lips. Of course, Karen wasn't happy. She had never expected me to confront her. She probably thought I'd be too passive, too uncertain to ever make her feel threatened. But now, I had made it clear. She wasn't going to walk all over me. Not now, not ever. Still, there was something unsettling about the message. As much as I had wanted to put a stop to whatever had been happening between her and my partner, a part of me couldn't help but wonder how far this would go. Would she retaliate? Would he try to fix things? Would there be more drama before all of this was over? I set the phone down again, my head pounding with the uncertainty of it all. I couldn't keep worrying about the unknown. I had made my decision. Now it was time to stick to it. But before I could dive too deep into my thoughts, there was a knock at the door. A sudden interruption to the peace I had so desperately craved. I froze for a moment, my pulse quickening. Was it him? Was he back to try and fix things? Or had Karen come to plead her case? I wasn't sure I was ready for another confrontation, not so soon. I walked cautiously to the door, peeking through the peephole. My stomach tightened when I saw who was standing on the other side. It was him. My partner. I had thought I was done with him, that I had drawn the line in the sand, but there he was, standing outside, looking like a man who had been through a storm. His expression was unreadable, and I couldn't tell if he was angry, regretful, or desperate. All I knew was that he wasn't done with this, not yet. I opened the door slowly, not letting him in. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. The anger and frustration I had been holding back were simmering just beneath the surface, but I wasn't about to let him see it. Not yet. He looked at me, his gaze soft but still pleading. "I know I've messed up. I shouldn't have let things get so far with Karen. I didn't mean to hurt you. But I need you to understand this thing with her, it's not serious. It was just a stupid mistake. I want us to work through this." I folded my arms across my chest, looking at him without saying anything. I didn't need his words anymore. The damage had already been done. "You think this is just a mistake?" I finally spoke, my voice low, dangerous. "Do you honestly think I'll just forget about everything that's happened? The lies? The secret lunches? The way you've been sneaking around behind my back, pretending everything was fine? No. This isn't a mistake. This is something you chose to do. His face fell, and I saw the truth in his eyes. He had no defense left. He wasn't ready to take full responsibility, but there was no point in denying it now. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness," he said quietly, looking at me like a man who had already lost everything. "I just want a chance to make it right. I don't want to lose you. Not over something like this." I stood there, unmoving, staring at him. I could feel the weight of everything that had happened between us pressing down on me. There was a part of me that wanted to believe him, that wanted to believe in second chances, in the possibility of fixing what had been broken. But I couldn't. Not this time. "I think you need to leave," I said, my voice final, the decision set in stone. "I can't keep doing this. Not now, not ever. You've made your choice." For a long moment, neither of us moved. He seemed to be waiting for me to soften, for some sign that I was willing to listen to him, but I wasn't going to. He had already shown me who he was. He finally nodded, his shoulders sagging. "Okay. I'll go. But I don't want to give up on us." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I closed the door behind him, the finality of the action settling over me like a heavy blanket. It was over. And now, I had to live with the consequences of that decision. The door clicked shut behind him, and I stood there for a long moment, listening to the fading sound of his footsteps. A strange stillness had settled over the house, one that felt both alien and familiar. I had expected a flood of emotions to come rushing in after sending him away, anger, relief, sadness, or even regret. But what I felt was something I couldn't quite place. For the first time in ages, I was alone. Completely and utterly alone. No apologies, no half-hearted promises, no questions hanging in the air. Just silence. I turned and walked into the living room, collapsing onto the couch. The weight of the last few weeks seemed to hit me all at once, the tension, the heartache, the constant knot in my stomach as I questioned his loyalty. It had all been building up, little by little, until it exploded in one final confrontation. But now, it was done. I let out a long breath, my body sinking into the cushions as if the weight of the decision had physically drained me. I had never expected the end to feel so empty. I thought I would feel victorious. I thought I would feel empowered, strong, like I had reclaimed control over my life. Instead, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and liberation. I reached for my phone, scrolling through the messages from friends who had been offering their support. They all seemed so sure of me, so proud of the strength I had shown. And part of me appreciated that. But a larger part of me was still unsure. Had I done the right thing? Could I have handled it differently? Or was this truly the end of something that had been so important to me? I shook my head, trying to push those doubts aside. I couldn't change the past, and I couldn't undo what had already happened. All I could do now was look forward. The rest of the evening was a blur. I didn't feel like cooking, so I ordered takeout. I didn't feel like watching TV, so I just sat there in the quiet, letting my mind wander. I thought about the future, about what I wanted for myself now. I had spent so much of my life wrapped up in us, in him. I had given so much of myself to someone who had proven, in the end, that he didn't value me the way I deserved. It wasn't just the betrayal that stung. It was the realization that I had lost myself in the process. I had let my fears, my insecurities, cloud my judgment. And while I knew I was better off without him, I couldn't help but wonder what my life would look like from here on out. The next morning was brighter, clearer. The heaviness that had filled my chest for so long had lifted just a little. I knew the coming days would be hard. There would be moments when I'd doubt myself, when I'd wonder if I had done the right thing. But deep down, I knew that I had. I stood in front of the mirror, looking at my reflection, and I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time: strength. I had survived. I had made a choice, and now it was time to live with it. I wasn't going to pretend like I was completely okay. I wasn't going to fake it for anyone. I had been hurt and it would take time to heal. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. Like I could be me again, without fear, without shame, without compromise. The phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I picked it up, seeing a message from my best friend. She had been my sounding board throughout this whole ordeal, always there when I needed her, always reminding me that I was worth more than the games he had played. I'm proud of you. I hope you know that. You deserve someone who sees you, really sees you, and cherishes you. Don't settle for anything less. I smiled, a small, genuine smile this time. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was beginning to see it too. I had been so focused on what I had lost that I hadn't realized what I still had: my friends, my independence, my self-respect. I wasn't just surviving. I was starting to thrive. As the days passed, I kept my distance from him. He tried to reach out a few times, calling and texting, but I ignored it. I wasn't interested in his explanations anymore. I had learned everything I needed to know. He hadn't been the partner I thought he was, and that was something I couldn't unsee. The most surprising part of all of this was how quickly I started to feel like myself again. Without the constant worry, the anxiety over whether he was lying or hiding something, I felt lighter. I didn't realize how much of my energy had been consumed by him, by his needs, by trying to fix things that were never really broken, until I no longer had to. I began spending more time with my friends, rediscovering things that I had forgotten about myself. I focused on my career, on the things that made me happy. I took up hobbies I hadn't had time for in years. Slowly, I began to realize that I didn't need him to complete me. I was already whole. And as for Karen, I never heard from her again. The tension between us had, in a way, dissipated. She must have realized that the game she had been playing had consequences, and I wasn't someone to be trifled with. I had made my point, and she knew it. Weeks went by, and I found myself standing on a new, unexpected path. There were moments of doubt, of course. There always are. But with each passing day, I grew stronger. I had taken control of my life, and I had made it clear that I wasn't going to settle for less than I deserved. Then, one day, I received a message from him. I miss you. It was simple, and yet it hit me like a punch to the stomach. I had spent so many months wondering if I could ever hear those words from him again. Wondering if he would finally get it. But now, I was calm. The pain had been replaced with clarity. I didn't respond. Because I didn't need to.